I absolutely flagellated myself over my own inability to decide. So it was not okay to be ambivalent.
Yeah.
I was furious with myself because I was like, but you're doing this to yourself. What's the matter with you? And how can you not make a decision? What's the matter with you? And I was talking to myself like that on the inside, which I now realize was so unhelpful and so not compassionate. I was being pulled every single day and I was absolutely exhausted by it.
I'm Keltie Maguire and you're listening to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Hello and welcome to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. If you want to truly delve into this question of, do I want to have kids or stay child-free? If you want to be intentional and deliberate and make a decision that feels aligned with who you are and the kind of life that you are hoping to create, that is not for the faint of heart. It really requires us to go super deep. It requires a level of self-knowledge, of self-trust, of exploration that I think a lot of people are understandably afraid to explore, pursue. And oftentimes we ask the question, like, how do I even do this? How do I figure out who I am and what I want and what it is I'm trying to create in this life? So today's conversation with my guest, Jennifer Flint, is perfect if you are asking yourself those big questions, if you are starting to recognize that, wow, this question of do I want kids or not is more than just a single decision in my life. It really is a deep dive, personal discovery journey. For some, it can be a very spiritual journey. And Jennifer is going to tell us about all of that and her own story of how she came to the decision to remain child-free. Jennifer Flint is a women's empowerment coach, leadership development specialist, and author of child-free novel Wild Egg. She is a spiritually curious seeker who currently lives in the northeast of England with a housemate who she met while volunteering at a Buddhist retreat in Scotland in 2019. Jennifer, thank you so much for being here with me. I am really excited and have been anticipating this conversation ever since we scheduled it together because you are such a source of wisdom and insight. And every time the two of us talk, I learn something from you. And that being said, I've read your book, which we're going to talk about today, but we haven't talked too in depth about your own story of making your kids or child-free decision. So thank you for being here. And to open things up, perhaps you can just share a little bit about yourself and what we might need to know.
Great, thank you. And before I do that, just as well to say thank you so much for inviting me. And I totally echo what you said. I've been so excited to talk to you, and every time we've connected, it's been great. And I just think you're such a force for good in the world, and I really love the work you're doing, and just such a pleasure to be able to support that. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
So I'm Jennifer Flint. I live in the UK in the northeast near Scotland. I'm 53 years old and I'm child-free by choice. And obviously we're going to talk about that. So at the moment, I'm working as a women's empowerment coach. I also do a bit of leader development work in not-for-profits. And I'm the author of Wild Egg, a story of one woman's search for her child-free life. And I'd probably also say I'm like a bit of a recovering control freak, which is something we might talk about.
Yeah. I'm a recovering a few things. Control freak, probably perfectionist, people pleaser. Yeah. We tend to fall into the same sort of camps together, right? So, okay. And for those people who are listening to the recording, they won't appreciate this, but I will briefly show the cover of your book because Jennifer's dressed beautifully on brand today. Yes. And this is her book, Wild Egg, which we will be talking about today. So thank you for that beautiful intro. And now I guess we'll talk about all the things. So I often like to start by asking people about the early days. So your girlhood, if you will, and whether you expected, planned, or hoped to become a mom, if that was something you had given consideration to.
Yeah. I think the only conversation I can really ever remember having about kids, when I was young, I think I was about 17. And I was with a group of my best sort of friends. So there was 4 of us talking about what we might do when we grow up kind of thing. And I remember we went round the 4 of us and it was so-and-so was going to, I think, be a hippie and have kids. She was going to be a teacher and have kids. She was going to work in the theatre and have kids. And it came to me and I was like, I don't really know. And I remember one of my friends said, you're going to be a businesswoman, which I just laughed at. I don't think we even knew what a businesswoman was. And then it was like, and I'm not sure about kids. So I remember that moment. So I think at some level, I think I was probably always ambivalent.
Yeah.
I certainly didn't have that strong sense, like my mum and my sister and most of my friends, like that was absolutely something that I was going to do. But yeah, it didn't really come up for me after that at all until really when I was 41.
Wow. Okay. So now at that point you were married. How long had you been in that relationship for? And had the question of kids come up at any point, or what was the discussion?
Actually, yeah, I need to just rewind a sec. So I've actually been married twice.
Yes.
So my first marriage, I got married I was like 26, 27. So looking back, it seems really young. My husband really, really, really wanted to have kids, but we didn't. When I think back, I'm like, we didn't even talk about it. Now it seems insane. But anyway, we didn't have a conversation about it before we got married. And he was the kind of guy, who walks in a room and kids just like literally gravitate to him. He was amazing with kids. So there was a sort of conversation that kept bubbling up and bubbling down about kids. So we were together for 5 years.
Okay.
And I think I was always ambivalent about it. So that continued in this conversation. And I remember that there sort of came a point where my husband said, okay, then we'll not have kids. And I think something in me, I think I just got the point, and it took me a long time to sort of come to terms with it. I thought, I can't deal with that actually, because I feel like at a really deep level, you're agreeing to something that's not really what you want to please me. And so therefore that means that you're willing to betray yourself at a profound level. And not only can I not live with that, I don't respect that. And that sounds awful to say. And not that I was conscious of that at the time, but that's when I look back and understand, make sense of it now. And I had this very deep feeling of I couldn't live with that, to be honest. And eventually that marriage unraveled and I left. And sure enough, about very quickly afterwards, he met someone and had kids.
Okay.
And then my second marriage, so I was 30, 34 when I met, 33 when I met my second husband, and he'd already had kids. And kind of we had a very sort of brief conversation at the beginning of the relationship where he said, I'm pretty certain that I don't want any more kids. And how do you feel about that? And I went, I've probably always thought I don't want them. Fine, no problem. And it was literally that was the end of the conversation. Right, crack on. And then we'd been together, I think, 7 years, and it had never come up in conversation. It wasn't something I was thinking about at all. And I think I'd probably just kicked it in the long grass. It was just over there, out of mind, until the moment where, ironically, on my mother's birthday, so we threw a party for my mum at our house, but I think she was 65. And at the end of the night, we were a bit tiddly, and we were drinking some champagne and doing that debrief of the party thing you do in our new house. It was all lovely. And he turned round and and this is the start of Wild Egg, he just turned round completely out of the blue and looked at me deep in my eyes, with this tender moment, and said, babe, I'd really like us to have a baby. And I went, what? I was kind of what? And I think because I was caught so off guard, it just went in. It was it penetrated so deep inside us. And I went, what? And he said it again, and I knew that he was really serious. And then I suddenly had this moment where I went, I literally almost felt myself go kind of, woo. And I kind of sobered up, instantly. And I thought, oh God, I'm really going to have to think about this, because I haven't actually really properly made a decision. And that was the start of it, really, so it went from not being something I thought about to boom, like that. And obviously at that time I thought, oh my God, I'm 41. Can I even have kids if I decide that I do want them? Which seems unlikely, but I suppose it's possible if I've not really thought about this.
Yeah.
And then I just fell into this abyss of,
oh my gosh.
just I was absolutely distraught because I suddenly, and I think, naively, and I know this is such a common thing, is like, I remember when I woke up the next day, I thought, oh, right, well, I obviously need to, engage properly with this question because I want to honour, where my husband is. And actually, now I'm thinking about it, it doesn't feel right just to let this profound choice drift past and almost like not make a decision.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, I want to be intentional in my life. So, okay, I just need to make a decision. And I kind of expected, to be quite honest, that I would sit down and just, a couple of hours, write me pros and cons and probably confirm that I didn't want kids. And then that would move on. And then that's not what happened at all. The more I thought about it, the more stuck I became.
Yeah.
And then I just kind of just found myself in a pit of existential torment.
Yeah.
Which is where the book starts.
Okay. And so I have a whole bunch of questions. I think, with regards to the book, we're probably going to talk about it in bits and pieces throughout today's conversation. And I don't want to give any spoilers, so we'll be mindful with my questioning, though. Of course, the book, I want to say, like, regardless of if you were to tell us what happens in the book, it's a must read because it goes so much into this inner journey, right? This sort of like spiritual, personal development process that we embark on when we really decide to explore this question. So whether or not, and a question I want to ask you, of course, is how much this story mirrors your own life, because to clarify, it is a fiction book, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Yeah. And I have a question about that because I know, or it seems that quite a bit of Holly, the character in the book, her story mirrors your own or is inspired by yours. Why did you decide not to write the book as a memoir, and why fiction, and sort of how did those two verge from one another?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I did actually start off writing it as a memoir, so I wrote I probably wrote about a third of it as a memoir, and then I was encouraged to send it off to see if I could get an agent and blah blah blah, and I got a rejection letter. So I decided at that point I got an opportunity to pay a little bit of money for a woman who's in the publishing industry who kind of helps people find agents, and kind of, so she'll review your manuscript and a sort of pitch type of thing, give you feedback. So I paid for that, which was money very well spent. And she gave me this big report and we had an hour's conversation. And basically in the course of that, she said, she gave lots of feedback. And then she kind of paused near the end and said, she kind of went, do you mind if I just like offer you something? She said, it's just like a gut feeling and take it or leave it as you will. And I went, okay. And I'm like, she's got me attention, So I'm leaning in and she went, I've just got this really strong feeling that this would be much more powerful as a fiction novel. And I went, right. And she said, and I think that from what I've read so far, you've got you write like a fiction writer. And she said, and I think if you turned yourself into a character, it would have broader appeal and it would be more relatable. So I was like, okay. And then that's kind of where it came from. And I kind of spent probably because after that, then I sort of had that imposter thing of like, it's one thing to sort of write your memoir of like, this happened, this happened. It's another thing to then create an actual fiction. And I was like, I don't know if I can even do that. Could I write a fiction story? And it probably took about 3 months where I was experimenting a little bit. So I was I felt like I was riding two horses. So I was still trying to progress it as a memoir, but then occasionally something would download and it would kind of start to become a fiction novel. And I got the name Holly Hardwick quite quickly in event, and I kept just sort of going, okay, Wild Egg, you tell me what you want to be, and trying to take my hands off. And then after a while, more and more it was coming through as a fiction story, and I kind of felt like Wild Egg was telling me that she wanted to be fiction. And then it was a great gift in a way, because I think if I had faithfully followed my story, it would have gone on and on, because it went on for so long. And I think the reader would have been, and now she's going to another retreat. You know what I mean? And I thought, okay, what if I took the trajectory of my journey and I know exactly where it starts on that kitchen floor. I want a baby moment. So I knew that was the start. And I thought, what would have to happen to a character to get to the sort of same point as me and go on a similar emotional and spiritual arc, but maybe shorter.
Yeah.
So what would have to happen to be catalytic? Yeah. And then I kind of plucked quite a few things from my own story, and then I kind of added bits in, and it gradually just sort of coalesced itself.
Yeah. It's super interesting because, I find that it sounds like that was super valuable feedback from this woman that you had hired. And I think it is beautiful as you've written it, as this work of fiction, which even without knowing how much it mirrored your own story, I thought, okay, this, like, somebody has been through this, right? Like the writer knows intimately what this is like. I related so much. There's certain scenes, when you're making the pros and cons list that I'm like, oh, wow, I don't think I've ever seen such a comprehensive, in-depth and true sort of pros and cons assessment of this decision. The book, I think, is worth it just for like this chapter that covers off on that. It's very good. And spoiler, it doesn't lead to any clear conclusions, which we'll talk about shortly. But it's interesting it's just kind of sounds funny to say that like fiction is more relatable than memoir, which is real life, right? And it's also, we so often base our expectations of what our journey might look like based on what we see, read, hear, which is often fiction or sort of a conceptualized view of things. And to the point that you make, it's like, not to say the story in the book is tied up nicely with a bow, but it is obviously more so than your own life experience, both in terms of timelines and all the like convoluted paths you took, which, we'll kind of get into a little bit the messiness of how that looked. But yeah, it's just some interesting thoughts coming to mind here about this book and how it is and isn't like what a real life journey of this decision can be and look like. One more question, just with regards to the book. And again, I do have more questions, but I want to also, I'm sure people are like, okay, and then what happened? How did she discover? What happened to her husband? What happened to the marriage? Where did the name Wild Egg come from? I have a few suspicions of what it could mean, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, obviously.
Yeah. This is so interesting. So I'd been trying to write an entirely different fiction book for years about a lighthouse keeper. And just before lockdown, I decided that I was going to get on the writing horse once more, a bit better equipped this time. And I hired a coach as well, which I hadn't done previously because I knew that I was going to face some of the old obstacles again, the inner critic, who do you think you are, all the stuff. So I was kind of ready to go. And then lockdown happened. And I joined a pop-up writing group, and you had to do it for a week thinking, oh, this will be a great little kickstart, just arrived at the right time. And there was a series of little activities you had to do every day. So I'm still thinking I'm writing the Lighthouse Keeper book. And one of the activities on like the second or third day was you had to put your title into the sort of Facebook group, and you got feedback and whatnot. And there was a couple of hundred people doing this thing. So I was thinking, at first I was like, oh, well, I know the title. I've had the title for years, done that, And then I was like, no, Jen, let's just really engage this, sit back, create a blank sheet of paper, and let's really see what might come through, thinking that I was going to get a slightly better title than the one I had. So this particular day I was preparing to put it in the group, and I was cycling from my friend's house, coming back home, and I'm thinking about it, and I'm riding my bike, and then all of a sudden the strangest thing happened, and it felt like a hand gently got hold of the side of my head like this and turned my head, and I was going, what's going on with my head, and it was literally moving like this, and I didn't feel like I was doing it, and I was like, this is really strange, why is my head going to the left? And I went like that. And as soon as it sort of went to the left, I heard wild egg. And I went, wow, what? What is wild egg? And I kind of got this download of, this whole journey and like how I made a decision not to have kids. And I was like, what? So I'm furiously sort of cycling home thinking, trying to write it down. And then I started doing a bit of research. I didn't even know Childfree was a thing. I never thought about it.
Yeah.
And I never identified as a child-free person. And suddenly I was like, what, I'm going to write a book about this? And I was like, I'm not sure about that. And then I kind of had to reverse engineer, what does wild egg mean?
Yeah.
So I was like, what a weird title. And I think what I came to make sense of it was to think about the idea. So I thought, well, eggs obviously deeply symbolic, but I thought wild is a word. Up until that point, I'd probably always thought of as, when you should have seen what we were doing last night. It was a wild night, usually alcohol or something, a bit like, associated with that kind of thing. And when I started thinking about what does that word like mean to me, what I came up with was the idea of rewilding. So, about peeling off all these layers of like what you're supposed to do, and what's the path that's laid out for you about this is what a good life looks like, and coming back to your own feminine energy, your own wildness. And then I thought an egg is a bit like the idea of birthing yourself. So I kind of thought it represented in some way the idea of birthing yourself from your own sort of spiritual egg, if you like. And that's kind of the sense that I've made of it. But I don't feel like that was my idea.
Super interesting. I love that story. That's super cool. Okay, well, as listeners can tell, this conversation is probably going to take different turns and talk about this decision and like perhaps we can say deeper layers, perhaps, or ways that maybe we've talked about before, and really from some of this might sound a little bit kind of esoteric to some of you, but I encourage you to keep listening, because I think for those of us who are willing to embrace this decision as the journey it can be, that the personal, uncovering, rewilding, and regardless of what the outcome is, right? This doesn't mean it's only for those of you who ultimately choose child-free. It can allow us to really go deep within ourselves. And that's why it's so confronting as well. I often say that this decision brings about a lot of sort of philosophical questions, existential questions about what we believe, what we want. If we choose to go to those depths with it, which are all things that, to bring us back to the pros and cons list, that go beyond the way a lot of us try or attempt to like approach this decision. And so you were saying, I sort of thought, Kate, I'm going to take an afternoon, I'll have a decision. And I should back things up. Had you and your husband then said, he says, I want to have a baby. You're like, right, okay, I need to ask myself what I want. Was there an agreed upon timeline, or like, what was that discussion like? Like, I need some time to myself to think about that, or how did the two of you talk about your side of that decision?
Do you know, my husband, whilst he did say that in a really tender, like beautiful way, and it was very heartfelt, there was never a sense of pressure. So I was lucky in that sense, because, he'd had kids. And I think, whilst he'd obviously, as I started to ask him some questions, say, tell me more, like, where's this come from, and what are you envisaging, and how would that look, and who would look, would you stop work? We're starting to get into some of that conversation.
I was wondering, okay, that's good, I think, right? Not just like, oh, you want a baby, but like, I'm sorry, like, why, how? I mean,
and I think every time, and when we would talk about that, but then I think then we would just, every time we would sort of arrive at the same point, which was, it's totally your decision, babe. So like, I would love to, but you've got to make the decision that's right for you. So there was no pressure in that sense from him. He was very like, Alex, I've put it on the table, but it's totally, down what you want. And in a way, I loved him for that. But in another way, it was almost like, so you've just given me this grenade, which has blown me apart on the inside. And then you're like, oh, but it's all right if we don't. And I was like, so I was sort of a bit angry as well. Because it felt light for him. And it's like, it smashed me apart on the inside. And I don't think I probably realized that until I sort of looked back a little bit, and at the same time sitting here now, like however many years, 12 years on from that, I'm so grateful. I've said, even though my husband and I are not together anymore, I've said to him, many times. I'm so grateful that you confronted me with that, because it was the best thing that I've ever done, as hard as it was.
Wow.
That facing that question allowed me to definitively make a choice, like a wholehearted, eventually, no, that is not for me choice. And that's been probably the best thing I've ever done for myself in my entire life. And it's had so much impact in other ways that we might go on to touch upon. Because I think what it allowed me to do is, once I closed the door, to motherhood, I never ever had any doubt after that, because I'd inquired at such a deep level, and it was such a clear choice by the end that it freed me up. And I think if I hadn't done that, there might have just been that little splinter in my mind going, oh God, should I have? What if? I think I might have picked, at that. Whereas because I engaged with it, it was like I felt so empowered in me. No.
Yeah. I relate to that so much, although my story is different than yours. And it's something I talk about so much with my clients that, and I don't want to say it doesn't matter what decision we arrive at, in the sense that, and maybe that's something we'll talk about, maybe not, but we often talk about this idea of there being a definitively right or wrong answer. But just knowing that we have thought this through, that we've been deliberate and intentional, I think it allows us to manage the challenges in a different way, because we think, no, I signed up for this, or I said yes to this, or I said no to this. We can remind ourselves why we have made the choices that we have and where that's coming from. Oh, because I feel this way, because I am this person, because this is what's important to me. I think it provides a better foundation for us to live from either place. And with the child-free choice specifically, because there's no, there's not a change marked in the same way as far as okay, now a baby or a child is here. It's easier to float in this sort of gray zone of still not having really made a definitive decision and keeping the door open a little bit of well, maybe, and maybe we need a bigger place, or maybe, I or we will stay in this city or country, and maybe in the future if. And when you're constantly living in the state of maybe and we'll see, even if it's not super conscious, I think it really spills over into your ability to actually step into your life and fully affirmatively live. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. My whole body's just nodding. Absolutely. And I think one of the things for me was, it's probably the only time in my life, up to that point, where I absolutely kind of went, no. Because I think as well, we're so conditioned as women to say yes.
Yeah, or maybe, or that's okay, no. Or
and
whatever.
I totally relate to what you said about, there was a part of me, I didn't want to shut the door. Maybe I just unconsciously, I didn't want to face what that meant. So it was almost like the door was just still a bit ajar, almost like I didn't have to think about now what, because it was kind of just hovering. And I think I'm so glad that I've turned around and decided to firmly shut it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you're I'm going to figure this out in a couple hours. I'll do my pros and cons list. Or, you walk through some of the things that you do and some interesting approaches in the book. But that did not lead to an answer, it sounds like. So,
no.
Okay. So tell me, first of all, why not? And what are your thoughts on the way we often look at this? It's pros and cons is a big one, and looking at it from a very rational perspective. And then what did you decide to do instead that eventually helped you uncover a more clear answer?
Yeah. I really diligently worked those lists.
They're so
really
good.
Tried hard. Months on end, I kept doing them, and it's I
Really?
would spring them on myself, thinking if I sort of catch myself before my brain catches up, I might just find something that bubbles up when I'm not looking. I tried it so hard, and I just got the point. I was absolutely I was so stuck, and I think. It's so weird now, because when I look back, I sort of think now, how could I not know? Do you know what I mean? But I didn't. I was so stuck at the time. And I think there was something just gnawing, and like they say in the Matrix, like a splinter in your mind driving you mad. There was something like that just, I felt there was something that wasn't being revealed no matter how hard I tried to dig, that just was there, but I couldn't get a hold of it. So I kept just getting, and I couldn't, thinking, how do you weigh these things? Like,
Yeah.
and I think just the more that I inquired into it, the more confused I became, because I started to really think about, like you say, I was about identity, about how I want to spend my time, about how committed am I to my career. Do you know what I mean? Like, and what's the marriage going to look like if we don't do it? And I think part of it was also, on the one hand, there's this path that's very mapped out with, like, what that's going to look like, because you're going to get pregnant, then you have a baby, and school, toddler school. It's like a carpet sort of rolled out, and you see this whole long trajectory of your life, and then you turn the other way, and you're like,
yeah,
well, it's just like a barren wilderness of emptiness, and you're like, and then there's the overwhelm of, so then what do I do? You know what I mean? Like, where do I go? And I think I didn't want to. I think now at some level I didn't want to face that. And also I think probably what I spent a lot of time doing when I look back is I absolutely flagellated myself over my own inability to decide. So it was not okay to be ambivalent. I was furious with myself, because I was like, but you're doing this to yourself. What's the matter with you? And, because I work in the space of personal development as well, I was like, FFS, you should be able to make, how can you not make a decision? What's the matter with you? And I was talking to myself like that on the inside, which I now realize was so unhelpful and so not compassionate. And I just got to the point, I was being pulled every single day, and I could literally go through the course of a day from waking up, and I would put the radio on, and I would hear it go, right, that's it, I don't want kids. And I'd be like, oh, right. And then by the time I get to work, something else, I'm like, oh God, maybe I do. And I was just pulled, and I was absolutely exhausted by it, to the point where so much energy was being used on the inside to kind of deal with that in a conflict. It was affecting my confidence, started to go, and I'd just been promoted to this big job, and I was just like, I was in such a mess.
Wow.
So to be honest, I was desperate. One of those serendipitous things happened, and I caught up with a friend who's the inspiration for a character called Diane in the book, and she was the only person I knew at the time who didn't have kids. And I hadn't really talked to anybody, because I felt quite ashamed by even some of the questions I was asked. I was like, you can't ask that. And I'm like, it's only you, Jen. There's nobody else here. But I was like, oh, I'm horrible. How could you even think about that? And so I was so up to my eyes in shame,
Yeah.
But eventually I was so stuck that I just blurted out to this friend of mine, because we went for a few drinks, and I was just like, how are you doing? You got your new promotion. And I just went, and all this stuff just poured out. And she was beautiful, and she listened, and she said, have you thought about bodywork therapy? And I went, what? What's bodywork therapy? Because I wasn't into it. I wasn't like esoteric at all at this point. I'm not like that. I'm like a project planner, and and I'm like, what? And she went, so she then told me about how she'd gone to see this woman. She tried to describe it. I still didn't really understand what she's on about. And she said, I think you're not going to make a decision, sweetie, like by logic in it. She said, you've got to get in touch with your body. And I'm like, oh God, you've got to get in touch with your intuition. Oh man. And I'm like, and to be honest, I was like, I literally don't know what else to do. And here's something she handed me a card. Yeah. This woman turns out to be really near where I live. And I thought, okay, what else am I going to do? So I sort of went in a little bit like, not sure about this, and it absolutely, I had a really strange experience. And I think that was probably the beginning, of really a spiritual journey that I've been on ever since. Yeah. And B, which a process of, you could say rewilding myself in a funny way. It was a process of like connecting my head and my body back together, and like actually becoming learning to trust myself by getting in my body and then getting in touch with my intuition and like letting my poor head have a rest. You know what I mean? Like my poor brain was trying to do all the work and I wasn't listening to the rest of me. And I think then that kind of led to something else. And then I just went on this whole journey about, you know, and then I went for psychotherapy as well at the end of that because stuff started to come up. Mm-hmm. And then by the end of the psychotherapy, I was like, well, I've learned stuff, but I'm still stuck.
Yeah.
And then I remember, so this is about probably a year in at this point, and I literally got to the point I was like, I don't know what else I think I've like excavated everything I can think of now. And I'm like, right, then I'm just going to come off the pill, see what happens. I'm like, I surrender.
I remember this now. Yeah, because I read the book a while ago. Yeah, okay. So you got off the pill.
I just went, right, okay, then let's roll the dice. And to my absolute shock, I was pregnant within about 2 months. And then I had a miscarriage at 10 weeks. And then I thought, like, you know, I'll try it. So maybe my husband was so excited, you know, and like, so I had the miscarriage.
Sorry to stop you. How did you feel upon becoming pregnant? Did that offer clarity or no?
Well, it did and it didn't. So, and this is something that I only came to realize a long time afterwards, after when I was actually writing Wild Egg, because I'd never registered this, but I realized in hindsight that when I did the pregnancy test and I did 3 because I was so shocked. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was like, this cannot be true. This can't be right. So by the time I did the 3rd one, I remember sitting on the loo just like going, and then I think I had a moment where the first reaction was shit.
Yeah.
But I didn't register it at the time. I only realised when I started writing the book that had been my first reaction. And I think I'd pushed it away because somehow it didn't feel all right.
Yeah. Yeah.
To feel that. So in the moment, I felt numb, so I didn't notice that had happened. And then the next thing was I just went into project plan mode. I was like, right, okay, I need to start reading up about what happens in pregnancy. I need to buy vitamin. I went boom, boom, and I just sort of, I think, went back into my mind because I think at that moment I couldn't listen to my intuition, I think, when I look back. And then when I had the miscarriage, I was numb again, but again, when I really look back now with hindsight, I was relieved and I was too ashamed to admit that I was relieved. So I pushed that away as well. And then we were like, oh, we'll try again. And I remember my husband like, oh, you know, it's great because we know we can get pregnant. And I was kind of a bit like, I was cut off at some level. I think I was like, And then a few months went by. I came back from a holiday and this was the point where we were going to try again. And I've written this scene into the book because it was so powerful for me. I went in the bathroom. I'm coming out the bathroom without a thought in my head. And I found my body moving as if it wasn't me moving it. And I pulled the door of the bathroom cabinet open, almost off the hinges. And I scrabbled in the back, found my pills and literally almost threw it down my throat and went, boom. And as I swallowed it, I heard in my head, motherhood is not my path. So clear, this quiet Obi-Wan Kenobi voice just went, and I went, what? And I heard it again, motherhood is not my path. And I went, now that is a decision. Because it was my body. Yeah. And I went, I got it. And that was it.
All right, I have some very exciting news to share with you, and that is off the back of some of your feedback, I have revamped our Confidently Child-Free group coaching program to create a month-long coaching intensive that is going to be kicking off starting January 9th. And this is for those among you who are pretty sure that you don't want to have kids. You are heavily leaning child-free. Some days you feel like you've made a total solidified decision not to have kids, and yet you keep waffling and wobbling. You might be spending time with your friends' kids and start thinking, oh gosh, am I really making the right choice? Or maybe you get comments from friends or strangers talking about the fact that you're going to regret your decision in the future, and you start to think that maybe they're right. In any case, you're not quite confident in your child-free decision, and it really is holding you back from moving forward confidently in your child-free life. If this sounds like you, I have an invitation to check out Confidently Child-Free, our group coaching intensive. Again, that's going to be kicking off on January 9th. We're going to run for a full month. And this program is going to help you get confident in your choice, to work through any of the lingering worries or concerns that you have, to be with like-minded women who get what it's like to choose that child-free path and yet to choose it sort of tentatively. If you don't relate to the messages and the fellow child-free women who you see out there on the internet who are saying, I've never wanted to have kids, I know it's definitely not for me, maybe they feel a little bit radical or an extreme in their perspectives. If you're somewhere still in that middle zone and you're not quite buying into this child-free path, this is a program you're definitely going to want to check out. I will include the details on our Confidently Child-Free group intensive in the show notes of today's episode, and you can also find them over at kidsorchildfree.com. And so one of the questions I wanted to ask, was there a defining decision point? And so for you, that was it.
That was it, yeah.
Okay, but that was preceded by a long journey of doing all kinds, and that continued, I think. Yeah. Okay, you and I have talked about having a meetup at Abram Hicks in the spring. So you're still a seeker, right? And like, yeah. Okay. Wow. Okay. So, and then how did the conversation go with your husband then? Like, motherhood is not for me. This is not happening. And how was that received, or did it not get discussed immediately?
Do you know, I'm trying to remember. That's a good question. I think from memory, I think my husband was like, I think the way that I communicated it, it was so clear. I just spoke, said the truth. And I said, it was like, I remember so clear the moment. And it was like every cell in my body it went boom, boom. Like it just went, I felt it go all the way through me, as if it was like, it felt like truth, just like a light of truth just went boom, all through my body. It was so powerful. And I think I just told him what happened, and he's like, okay.
Right. I'm not going to argue with truth running through your body. Yeah.
It's like, okay. Yeah.
Okay. And so if I understand correctly, now this marriage is no longer.
That's true. Correct.
What was the dissolution of the relationship due to this decision, or was it for other reasons?
I would sort of say it was indirectly related, in the sense that we carried on for quite a lot of years after that. And then when I began writing Wild Egg, I think I had such a breaking open experience. And then this is when the final bit of probably shame that I had never acknowledged came to the surface, where I realized, oh God, I didn't actually want a baby. Like, I didn't actually want the baby, my baby that I was pregnant with, because I'm so relieved that I didn't have the baby. And that brought up a lot of stuff for me and for my husband. And I think then the journey that I went on as I wrote Wild Egg, I started to go through some sort of process. I don't know. I went through a kind of breaking open journey. And in the midst of that, me and my husband just sort of unraveled. So I think it was related to my decision in the sense that it was an inevitable stage of the journey that I think was set in train by that experience and that decision. But, we're still like, love each other dearly. We speak, regularly. And, it was just time for our paths to diverge, as sad as that was. And, as hard as that was. Yeah. That's just where we got to in the end.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a beautiful parting, and I'm sure it was not always beautiful, right? Like, I'm sure there was lots of upheaval, but it's uncommon, but always so wonderful to hear about partners who are able to say, that, this was for a time and a place, and now it's no longer. But it sounds like it was an essential part of your life journey. So
yeah, definitely.
I want to, I mean, you use the word like this, the truth kind of shone through. It was like a light in my body. Trust, and specifically self-trust, is something that a lot of my clients grapple with. And the big question they have is, how do I trust that what I'm feeling is true? Especially when, to echo your experience, there's a lot of flip-flopping back and forth where what feels true perhaps one morning or day or week might feel different. And so there's a sense of, can I trust the way I'm feeling? What suggestions do you either have, or what has your experience been like to know that what feels true is actually true?
What a great question. I mean, I've definitely been on a journey with this, as you've heard already. And I think that it's a real challenge. I feel like specifically for women, because, we do live in a patriarchal society. We live in a culture that conditions us to have a belief that what success looks like is a very masculine energy, version of success. It's very logical, it's competitive, all that stuff, that I digested and bought into and tried to live up to for a long time, and achievement and all that stuff that has its place. But I think we're often trying to sort of squish ourselves into that shape that doesn't quite fit us, especially if we go out and try and build a career. And I think also we're very conditioned to hate our bodies, and have lots of issues with our bodies.
I agree.
So I think we kind of end up really cutting off a lot of that wisdom. And sometimes we've had bad experiences. So a lot of us have had bad experiences, connected to our bodies. So it's just, there's a real lot of factors, I think, that affects that. So I think, and I'm still learning this, and I'm relearning it all the time. But I think one of the things that I've really come to believe is like your body does not lie. Like, and I've got the point in my life now where I think it's not always easy to know whether I'm accessing it properly, but I think what I have to practice is like becoming still and becoming quiet, and where I'm feeling like turbulence, or, feeling like I'm annoyed with myself, or I should be doing this, or I should be doing that, and I should be better at this. And when I notice that kind of language, is like getting better at turning towards it, which is what I failed to do, originally, and kind of going. So I talk to myself and I go, eventually after I've, kind of told myself off, and then I start going, hang on a sec, I know what's happening here. And then I start to go, oh, come on. I'm like, oh, pet, which is like a term of endearment where I come from.
Yeah.
Come on, pet. And I'm like, what's up? You're really angry. And I'm like, I sort of try and turn towards how I feel on the inside and be like with compassion and go, okay, there's something important going on here. So rather than see confusion or ambivalence as like a weakness or something that's wrong, it's like, okay, I'm old enough and wise enough now to know there's something important going on here. Yeah. So let's have patience to stay with it, with all the judgment and all the shame and all the awful stuff that's going on that feels really toxic. Let's just like allow it to be there and accept that it's there, and like rather than try and push it away, let's like sort of turn towards it with more of a friendly attitude, like that kind of cliched but so true idea of like speaking to yourself like your own best friend, and becoming a bit more still and peaceful. And like there's this lovely phrase that, because I've started going to the Quakers about a year ago, and one of the practices that we do there is like we sit in what's called attendant waiting, which I think is such a beautiful term. And it's this idea of like cultivating a sort of stillness, which I guess often people find in meditation and things, and like allowing everything that's there just to be there, and then like, gently kind of coming back into your breath and your body and just like waiting for something to come through you. And that's what I'm practicing a lot now. And I think I heard a brilliant Marie Forleo, who's she's like a life coach, who talked about this idea of like sitting with a question and like tuning in and getting quiet and kind of holding the question and notice whether your body leans in or leans out. And I've really like when I heard her say, I thought, I understand that, and that really resonates with me, and I'm really trying to cultivate that now. So like I'll sit sometimes now if I'm, wrestling with a decision, and I'm not always saying I find it easy, but I'm like, does this feel like a yes or a no? How do I feel in my body? And I deliberately almost try and dig past my brain and go, right, what? And I'm getting more in tune to go, I'm like, it feels like a no. And it's almost like I feel myself going,
yeah.
And I'm like, okay. And I suppose then the next challenge is honouring what's, rather than going, well, it can't be.
Yeah,
no.
yeah, totally.
I've learned to just respectfully go, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I have heard Marie Forleo talking about that, and I seem to recall, and it may have been a different clip that I had seen, but like she talks about an expansion or contraction, like for her is the feeling. And I think that's such a great measure. And of course, everyone's will be perhaps unique, right? For you, these words expansion, contraction may not resonate, but you can even perhaps draw upon what another yes or a no has felt like, and just pay attention. And this piece around compassion for me personally, and this is something I'm sure people have heard me talk a lot about, it was such a key part of my journey and my decision. And I'd be curious to hear if it's the same for people who ultimately choose motherhood. But I think specifically because being child-free is still very much for many people considered the wrong, bad thing for a woman to choose. That we do come down on ourselves and we internalize all these kinds of judgments. And the way I talk to myself about how I felt, that it shouldn't be this way, that I shouldn't feel this way, that this is bad, that I'm all sorts of bad names. The more I could just sort of have this curiosity of like, oh, interesting. Like, well, what if it's okay? And what if you can just be that way? And what if it's all right if being around young kids makes you really cranky and anxious, rather than thinking, gosh, aren't you, sour grapes all the time or whatever.
Yeah.
It's, and again, a lot of what Jennifer and I talk about, this is like hindsight now, of course, sort of helping make sense of our decision. But I do see that it was so key to connecting with and then accepting how I felt, to offer compassion to that first. So
100%. I think I would so echo that. And I think if I probably would pick one thing that's been the most transformative in my life, it's probably that. It's probably learning how to turn towards myself with compassion. And I think, and you're so right, when I look back now, I realise that I had ingested entirely unconsciously this idea that somehow to not want children, or to not feel drawn particularly to children, is wrong, and there's something wrong with you. And then, that whole thing that, about being a woman and being a woman of substance and in the fullest expression of being a woman is inherently entwined with motherhood. And I think it's such a deep, paradigm that we've been conditioned to believe since we were, little girls, that I didn't even realize. And I think, like you, I think I'm a pretty educated, reasonably intelligent, like thoughtful, independent, strong woman. And I'm like, but I was broken by it, because I think at some level I hadn't even realized that I believed that until I'm wrestling with it, and all this stuff kind of comes up that I didn't even know was there. And I think to allow yourself the grace to go, I'm absolutely enough. This is just about a choice, and either you want to go down this path or that path. Like it's not. It's just a choice like any other life choice,
Yeah.
But it does mean, and I think maybe this is part of the grief that comes with it. It does mean, as you've rightly said, that in this current context that we live in, and it seems to be particularly potent at the moment, you kind of know that you're making a decision that means you're permanently othered in culture as a woman. And so I think community and these kind of conversations feel so important to counterbalance that narrative. And I'm so glad that it's, happening now, because this conversation wasn't around, when I was struggling with it. And I'm so like glad, you know, that it's like, you know, there is more of this now, because I think it's so needed, because it's so pervasive, that because it's the air we breathe, isn't it, from when we're little kids, and it's reinforced everywhere in culture. And it's just wrong. It's just a perspective that's shoved down our throats. It's not morally superior, but it's kind of made to feel like that.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the grief of this decision, or some of these like feelings of grief. I'm curious, and I think a lot of people have this idea that when they've made the decision that feels right or best for them, that it will feel exclusively good. There will be this natural ease. You know, you talk about this sort of light bulb, full body no moment in this case when you take the birth control pill, and the idea that from there on after, you know, it just feels good. All right, I decided, perfect. I'm never looking back. My experience and many of the women I talk to is it's not so straightforward. And so I'm curious, did you, and I'm hearing probably yes, but did you experience grief around this decision? And if so, can you speak to like, what was that grief, and what did that process sort of look like or involve for you?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it came like after the no moment, very quickly on the back of that, something else kind of, well, after the no came, then the question went, now what? And I was like, what? Because I exactly like you thought, oh, great, you know, that's it, I'm done.
Yeah.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
And then it was like, well, now what? And I went, oh, you're joking. And it was almost like, you think you're at the end, now you're
at the beginning again.
Like, I was like, and I got this, again, I suppose, this intuitive call. I was like, it's hard to even put it into words. It was like I got this feeling that sort of rose right on the back of that moment going, I feel like I need to go somewhere. And I was like, okay, I feel like I need to go north. Scotland. Okay. And then I was like, I don't know, I need to do like a pilgrimage. That word sort of came up for me, and I was like, pilgrimage? Sort of, you know, no, monks do. I didn't really know what a pilgrimage meant in that sense. I was like, okay. And then like I Googled, I remember Googling Scotland and meditation, and this place came up and it went poof. And I thought, and you know, we have those moments, I was like, I need to go there. So I end up on this random island run by Tibetan Buddhists. So I've had no real experience of Buddhism. I've done a bit of mindfulness at this point about it. And this incredible magical island where they do retreats and stuff to do with Buddhism. And I just went for a visit, and I remember I met the first person that I probably met who was Childfree by choice, and she's the same age as me, and we ended up just having this instant bonding and really deep conversations. And she, on the first night that we met, we were like talking for hours, you know, and I was like, so how did you always have conversations on this island, like, how did you end up here? Because it's quite a hard place to get to, so you don't really stumble on it by accident. So she tells me a story about how she ended up pulled there through strange serendipity as well. And she said these words, and she was going to, and why I came was I was grieving for my mother. And as she said the words, I started crying, and I was like, that's weird. Why am I crying? I don't even know why I'm crying, because I'm just listening to this woman's story. And she turned and looked at me, and I went, and she's watching, and I'm like sort of looking, going, what's that about? And I went, oh, wow. I think I know why I'm here now, because I had no idea. I was like, what am I doing here? I have no idea. She went, why are you here? And I said, I think I've come to grieve for motherhood. And something just went kind of opened. And then I realised I had a few days where I was like, all the stuff, I suppose, that I'd now said no to kind of became visible. So I thought, God, I'm sad about the fact I'll never share those kind of conversations and moments with my mum, you know, and my sister. I'm sad that I'm going to not have those Kodak moments, you know, like the wedding. And, you know, I'm sad that John, I'll never see him be a father. I'm sad I'll never be part of the motherhood gang. And it went on and on.
You can see I'm feeling it right now. You're describing it. Wow.
And I'm like, and I'm never going to have the growth of motherhood. And I'm now going to be like permanently a bit weird and all this stuff. So, and I was really blindsided because I was like, and I think for a while, there was probably a bit of me kind of almost going like, but you've chosen this. So like, are you allowed to be sad?
Totally. Yes. Good point. I've heard that. Yes.
Yeah. So I was like, well, I obviously am.
Yeah.
And I think that was and you know what really helped me, and I only sort of found it a few years later, and then I was like, this makes so much sense now. So I went through this kind of, I suppose, period of grieving and then doing some rituals to go, I need to let this go with love, because as much as I'm sad, I know this isn't the right choice. I mean, I'm so at peace with that, but I obviously just need to allow myself to feel sad about the things that I'm therefore not choosing to have, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And later on, years later, I came across a book in my leader development work, which I've actually got because it's so good here, just as a reference called
Also matches your sweater.
Yeah, I know, I'm all yellow. Transitions, Making Sense of Life's Changes by William Bridges. And he talks about this idea that change is the stuff that happens to us externally, like, you know, we lose a job, we buy a house, we get married, divorce, whatever. Transition is the internal reorientation that happens psychologically and energetically and emotionally on the inside to kind of realign yourself with the thing that's happened on the outside. And he said, and the misconception that we've got is that we think, you know, we make whatever the thing is happens, and then we go, all right, well, I've said goodbye to that, I'm in the new beginning. But actually, there's always grief. The first stage is always grief that comes with any transition, because you have to let go of and say goodbye to the identity that was wrapped up in whatever the thing is, you know, the story and the future imagination that you've had about the trajectory you're going to go on. You've got to say goodbye to that, you know, and lots of things.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether that's a choice you've made or it's been kind of put upon you. And then what he said is that also the kicker is that if you don't process the grief and you kind of almost don't move through it, you'll never quite really move on into your new beginning. Oh, and by the way, you don't just go from the ending to the new beginning. You go in this really awful bit called liminal space, or the messy middle, where you are lost and you are kind of disintegrating to some extent, and a bit like the proverbial caterpillar, because the bit that we forget is the caterpillar dies and goes into a mush before it becomes the butterfly. But we often don't like to think or look at that horrible, uncertain, lost middle bit, because we just want the nice butterfly wings.
Yeah.
And then it was like, it made so much sense to me of like, right, that's what happened. There was the grief bit, and then there was this big long period of like, now what? Now what do I want to do with my one precious child-free life? Oh, no. Now I've got to think about
that. Oh, wow. You describe that so beautifully, and I just relate so much. And I do think this is, you know, there's this period of uncertainty that follows either kids or child-free decision. I mean, talk to anyone who comes into motherhood and this feeling of like, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into, and what now? And and who am I? And who is this little human that I now need to tend to? And it's something we talk so seldom about, and we don't want to accept that sort of that liminal space. It's sort of, you know, it's like when you're midair and you're neither here nor there, you're not in the ending, you're not in the beginning. But it's part of that process. And I think part of it is being in that discomfort, that uncertainty, that messiness, and knowing that it's essential. So,
yeah. And it's awful. It's awful when you're in resistance to it. And that's the lesson that I have to keep relearning. But actually, when you can surrender to it, which is why I'm describing myself as a recovering control freak, because I'm like, I want a plan and I want it now. And when am I going to get to my new beginning? And like when I like allow myself to just go, oh, right, I'm in the mush. I am the mush. Okay. It's like, that's where the growth happens. That's where the new ideas come. That's where you expand. It's where all the transformation really happens. But we want to rush our way through it because it's so uncomfortable to be in that gooey mess. You know, who wants to be there? Because we like certainty, want clarity, we want to move with energy. And, you know, you're just like in this amorphous kind of, in between place.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, I think if, you know, as you were alluding to, and this is what William Bridges said, if we try and rush our way through, we keep getting pulled back all the time to kind of almost do the work that we haven't really internally done yet.
Yeah.
Because we can't really get to go and get our 200 quid until we've done that work. But not easy, but worth it.
Yeah. I'm curious. I mean, I'd love to hear, first of all, what life is like today. As you mentioned, 10, 12 years on the other side of this decision. I also, if you're open to sharing, I know you've been through a lot personally in these last few years. And so I'm wondering sort of how that's been for you as a child-free woman. I mean, you can share a bit about what's been going on, but I know sometimes that when we've made a particular choice and then other things in our life are maybe not working in the way we'd like, or we have a loss, it might be easy or tempting to think, if only I'd chosen something else, this might not feel or look this way. So I guess that's about 3 or 4 questions rolled into one, but maybe you could just bring us up to speed on some of the more recent years of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, so I published Wild Egg. I finished the manuscript for Wild Egg on the eve of my 50th birthday. So I had this, you know, big milestone that was kind of coming very quickly towards me. And in the run up to that, sort of just before lockdown, I'd basically decided I was leaving my corporate career after like 25 sort of years. I was kind of like an HR director. I took a risk to kind of just go Geronimo with no like real plan or anything. Wrote Wild Egg, marriage broke down, and then I left my career. An auntie died who I was very close with, then me. Dad died, and then my dog died. And I found myself in a really profound wilderness for a while. So I was doing some consultancy work that was going really well. And then I'd navigated all of that thinking, you know, haven't I done well, you know, with everything I've learned from my personal development. Yes, about, you know, grief and transit. And I thought I had like aced it, and I'd kind of navigated all this. And then a year after my dad's death, grief basically did me. It was like, you haven't really done this. You've sort of performed this, but you haven't really like allowed yourself to get properly broken. So now we're going to do it for you. And I went blind on the 1-year anniversary of my dad's death in a very strange set of circumstances. And something got broken in my brain because it was because of how weird the whole experience was. And I was having visions and I had visitations from dead people. And I'm like, I didn't even think I believe in any of this stuff. So I'm like, what has happened to my brain? And I had a bit of breakdown / spiritual awakening, I think anyone would call it. And I had to step away from the work that I'd managed to cultivate, and everything kind of fell apart. And I fell apart for a while, which probably up until maybe a few months ago, I've been wandering around in the wilderness of midlife going like, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I want anymore.
Yeah.
And I think it probably is a natural consequence of, in a funny way, writing Wild Egg, because I think I hadn't ever claimed being child-free till I wrote this book. I never particularly thought that much about it anymore. And I think because I went back over my journey, it was almost like a process of excavating, what did I really learn from this? You know, like really crystallizing that in my own mind. And I think what happened as a result of that process was I started going, wait a sec. So I made this decision to be child-free by choice, and I'm so happy with that. So I'll let go of the conditioning in the programming of, you know, to be a woman of substance and have a meaningful life, you know, is about having kids. So I've got rid of that program. But then, of course, I went, what other programs might be running that I hadn't spotted? So, and then everything sort of came into question: career, marriage, everything about the way I sort of live my life, I suppose. And the one thing so it's been a really hard liminal space that I've been in for quite a while now. And it's been really difficult. But the one thing that's absolutely held us steady when I felt so much falling away, when I felt like I was struggling, to kind of hold myself through that, the one thing I kept coming back to was, I know what truth feels like in my body. And I absolutely know that that choice that I've made to be child-free was so me standing in my truth. I know what truth feels like in my body. And I know that this process that I'm in now is leading me to another truth. Yeah. I can feel it because I know what it's like. So I'm just going to trust that. And it's like it's literally been this one anchor when everything else is for. It's like I've held on to for dear life. And it's like, and again, it's just reinforced the fact that I'm so grateful. And I think in a funny way, what I've realised I'm probably struggling with now is an overwhelming sense of freedom, because I'm going, wait a sec, so I don't actually, so not only about kids, I'm like, maybe I don't need a relationship or a partner. Maybe do I even want to be married again? Do I want a relationship? Well, where do I want to live? And it's like the world has just opened even wider now. And I'm like, wow, this is a scary level of empowerment. And I think I'm starting to be able to catch my breath with it now. And I'm sort of sitting now going, okay, this is moving now from being terrifying, because, I guess the death of a parent and certainly brings up that question of, am I really fully alive and living the most meaningful life that I want to live? And I feel a sense that everything I've learned through the process of deciding to be child-free has really helped me to navigate this profoundly challenging time. And some exciting things I feel like this sense of like something's brewing now, and I'm like learning how to keep my hands off the steering wheel and just go, okay, I'm being taught how to surrender in a deeper way now. And it's like it's starting to get interesting now. I finally feel like I'm coming out of that mushy transitional period. So I'm thinking feeling like 2025 feels like it's going to be another new beginning of some sort, which is yet to be revealed. So yeah, it's been a really interesting time in that sense, Wow. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. And then some. I mean, this life can be so many things if we allow it to be. And that doesn't mean it can be incredible and beautiful and awe-inspiring, but I think often it does require us to go through those dark nights of the soul, if you will, sometimes many times. And yet, we come through that, and it's like there's this new sort of level or experience or perspective that's even brighter and broader. And but it's challenging to navigate through. So I just, thank you for sharing all of that in your journey with us. And it's not easy to see it when we're in it, but when we come through the other side of these periods, like kind of understanding how everything is pieced together and been, in some sense, like a critical or essential part of the journey. It's really powerful.
Absolutely,
so,
yeah, absolutely. And this is the beautiful boon of menopause / midlife, of like everything's burning away to reveal, and in the ashes, it's like, okay, what's the being fertilized that can now kind of grow anew. So yeah, it's a really fascinating time of life now. I
agree.
think.
Yeah, it's a period of time. I'm 42 right now, and so I guess, this is obviously very individual where people are at in that perimenopause, menopause journey, and I feel like I'm just sort of at that beginning. But it feels very powerful and interesting time to be a woman, just societally, in terms of this time that we're at in culture. And then, of course, for those of us who are in our 40s and 50s, it holds a lot of fascination and interest. So I'm curious to hear and see what you learned through it all. And it's a topic that is very much on my mind. And I think it's an incredible period of self-discovery and change and power if we can somehow allow it to be, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, Jennifer, before we wrap up, I have 5 rapid fire questions that I ask everyone. Everybody has this lovely reaction like, oh my God, okay, let me brace myself. So the first 2 are finish the sentence. Being child-free is?
Liberating.
Being child-free is not?
Lesser.
What is one tool or resource that you think would be helpful for women who are on the fence about kids?
Ooh. I think anything you can do that feels right for you, that's about getting yourself back in your body and trusting your intuition.
What is one thing that you would like women who are moms to know?
Oh, that's a good question. This is all coming for you. You've just pressed the pause button, but all these questions are coming for you as well. We're here for your sisters when you're ready. Yeah.
If you could give one piece of advice to someone who's currently on the fence about whether or not to have kids, what would that be?
Trust that your ambivalence is actually a sign of wisdom and turn towards it.
That is wonderful advice. I couldn't agree more. How can people find you, Jennifer? How can people purchase Wild Egg and find out about the work that you do?
I'm really only on Instagram, social media wise. So I'm at Wild Egg 21. I love getting messages from readers. So I've had virtual and in-person coffees with beautiful women who've reached out from all over the world. And I'm always up for, I've had also conversations with women who really want to write their story and maybe are thinking of fiction. And I've had a few great conversations. So I'm always up for anything I can do to help or any kind of conversation like that. And I love coming on podcasts like this. So I'm super open to any kind of collaboration where I can amplify the work of women who are wanting to express their story or do, important work like you're doing, Keltie, just to raise this conversation and awareness. So, yeah. Anything I can do to help, I'm really happy to.
Wonderful. And if people would like to buy the book, can they find that?
Oh, yeah. On Instagram, okay. I've got a lot of links of where people can buy it. So it's on Amazon, it's on Barnes & Noble, Waterstones, various places.
Okay. I can highly recommend it. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it and I found it very, very relatable. So we'll make sure to link to the Instagram and your other places in the show notes of today's episode. So
fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on today, Jennifer. And thank you to everyone for listening. Okay, now that we've wrapped up today's conversation, this is the part of the episode where I tell you that you need to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. And you really need to do that. And I'm going to tell you why. And that is because one of the big ways that people find and discover new podcasts like this one is through reviews. So if you yourself can go say what you loved about this podcast, why people who are on the fence should tune into the Kids Are Child-Free podcast, that's going to help other people who are also wondering, should I have kids or stay child-free, to discover us. Thank you in advance for doing so. I will be featuring some of the reviews in upcoming episodes, so maybe I'll share yours. You never know. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you back here soon for our next episode.